Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world joining us today. My name is Christy Lindstrom. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at iGraphics. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, GoCardless's Business Process Management Journey. We're so glad you could all be here to join us for what promises to be a great session. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone is on mute today, but please feel free to submit any questions you may have in the Q&A function of the Zoom meeting. The webinar will be recorded and all registrants will receive the recording following the webinar. You'll receive it through an email tomorrow. If for some reason you don't, definitely check your junk mail, but of course feel free to reach out to us through the iGraphics website if you have any issues accessing that recording. Like I said, we'll get to questions at the end, so please, at any point throughout the session, feel free to submit your questions in the Zoom function. At this point, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Nora Pazer. She is the Business Intelligence Manager at GoCardless, an iGraphics customer located in the UK. She has 15 years of experience in financial services. She started her career in management consulting, working in various project management and business analysis roles, mostly focused on regulatory change. Nora joined GoCardless about 4 years ago, initially as part of the business intelligence team, working with operational teams to provide them with data for reporting and process purposes. She recently refocused on process management about a year ago and kicked off and is leading GoCardless's process management initiative since September of last year. With that, I am happy to turn it over to Nora.
Thank you so much, Christy, for such a lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. As Christy mentioned, I'm Nora Pazer, and I'm going to be talking to you today about GoCardless's business process management journey. And yeah, if you do have questions, do pop it into the chat, and we'll come to them at the end. So let's get started. First, I'll give you a quick introduction to GoCardless and our team. Then we'll cover why we decided to embark on this journey and why we chose iGraphics specifically. Next, we'll look at our approach to implementing iGraphics, including what we've done so far, as well as our next steps and longer-term plan. Finally, we'll cover some of the challenges and learnings. And yeah, as mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, let's start with a quick introduction. At GoCardless, we believe that bank payments are the best way to pay and get paid. We help businesses collect both recurring and one-off payments without the chasing, stress, or expensive fees. We're also helping businesses make faster and more informed decisions through easy access to customers' bank account data. In terms of our team, I'm leading, as Christy mentioned, a broader process mapping initiative. And basically, yes, I've worked in financial services management consultancy roles before joining GoCardless, and I joined GoCardless as business intelligence analyst. And as part of that, I worked a lot with operational teams. So that didn't just include providing dashboards and reports to them, but also thinking about how to surface data for the various processes that they undertake day to day. And I think that positioned me really well for switching to a more process-oriented role. The main sponsor of this initiative is Prince, who is our VP of Business Services, and that's a team that sits across the whole of GoCardless and includes central data and business system teams as well. Our main subject matter expert in process management is Lily, who is aligned specifically to the finance team. And last but definitely not least, we have Petra on my team, who does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to process documentation. So one of our company values at GoCardless is start with why. So I didn't really have a choice on what to name this section. So we started more seriously thinking about process management at GoCardless in the last year or so. And there are multiple reasons why it seemed like the right time for us to do that. As we've been maturing as a company, there's been an increasing need to think more strategically about how we approach audits, operational resilience requirements, but also big cross-functional transformation programs. And all of these things were pushing us to think more about our processes and how to approach them in a more robust and holistic way, in a way that we can see how both processes, systems, data, and people are linked to each other. We also obviously already had some documentation, but this was across various different tools, which were a bit more visual than something like iGraphics. For example, Lucid, Slides, or Confluence. And this was obviously very far from consistent or complete information. So in order to get a buy-in to focus on this and have a more official initiative around it, what we communicated to the wider business and our key stakeholders was that we wanted to have standardized and consistent process documentation and a clear way to view associated risks, controls, as well as underlying systems, teams, and data. And in addition to the what, we wanted to be really clear about the why. So we called out that this would enable us to facilitate much easier and more efficient audits, which we were doing an increasing number of. Close existing gaps that we were aware of, for example, in the area of operational resilience, achieve continuous process improvement, especially when it comes to efficiency. Also assess the impact of making changes in a more repeatable and robust way, whereas in the past, we potentially even spent months as a one-off exercise to understand what the impact of a certain change initiative would be. This, we thought, would enable us to do that much more easily and in a more repeatable way. And last but not least, we wanted to demonstrate organizational maturity to our investors. So I think all of the above would feed into that. And all of these points were successful hooks, and it got us buy-in from the key stakeholders, and it allowed us to go ahead with choosing and setting up a process mapping tool. So after assessing a few options, we decided to onboard iGraphics. Surprise. In addition to cost, there were a few reasons why we preferred Process 360 Live to other tools. It met all of our requirements in terms of process mapping capability. And the user interface was also very intuitive and user-friendly, which was really important. And we were also impressed by the risk management and reporting functionality. So basically, after a couple of 4-hour proof of concept sessions with iGraphics, without breaks, we were sold. And special shout out to our favorite iGraphics consultant, Stefan, for his efficiency in covering all the things we wanted to see in those sessions. And also on that note, I should mention that we found the iGraphics team really easy and nice to work with during the selection and the proof of concept process. And that also contributed to our decision when we selected them. So basically, we had the business need, the tool, and the go-ahead from our stakeholders. Where did we start? First, we wanted to have a clear structure on how to organize our processes. And in addition to that, we also had a requirement to be able to provide an end-to-end view of key cross-functional processes, such as order to cash, purchase to pay, hire to retire, etc. So because of those 2 points, we decided to set up navigation in iGraphics in 2 different ways. One was these end-to-end processes, and the other was a process framework, which would include all processes across GoCardless. And on the main dashboard landing page in Process 360 Live that you can see on the screenshot underneath the 2 tables, we wanted users to be able to select their preferred view on how they wanted to navigate from the drop-down options. So in order to set all of this up, we developed what we called the GoCardless process framework. In order to do this, we used a list of industry standard business functions and process capabilities, which formed the basis of the framework. In order to do this, we focused on 3 levels that are shown here on this slide as process groups, process capabilities, and business processes. And then once we had the standard list, we then updated them to reflect anything really specific to GoCardless. For example, payment processing being our core business, that had to be reflected in the framework as well. And finally, we engaged various stakeholders across the business to get their feedback on the framework before implementing it in any detail. We first created and iterated the framework in a spreadsheet. And then once we've done those stakeholder reviews and gathered comments and feedback, we then created a more visual representation of it in iGraphics that users would be able to navigate to the relevant processes through. So you can see the first page of that on the screenshot. So on that one, they'd be able to select a process group or area, and then they would be able to keep drilling down So the next stage, they would be able to see the underlying process capabilities with a brief description against each. We were also keen to highlight if any area didn't have any approved content yet to make the user experience better, so people would not be trying to click on things that then don't have any content behind them. Excuse me. So then once you select a process capability, then you'd be able to see the list of business processes underneath that. And then if you select one of those, it takes you to the actual process map. So the way we set these up is using standard BPMN, but we were really keen to show, in addition to the standard roles or teams against the swim lanes, gateways, etc. We wanted to show the systems that are supporting or are necessary to perform each step, so that those dependencies are clear. And we also wanted to show linked processes consistently as a separate swim lane across the bottom. So again, it's clear what's upstream, what's downstream, dependencies across. For the end-to-end process views, we started with finance. So Lily created this finance process taxonomy for us, and we focused on order to cash to start with. So if you, for example, select this in iGraphics, then you can click on order to cash and then see the specific taxonomy view for that end-to-end process. So then you can get to the processes that you can see here, either via this way of navigating using the end-to-end processes, but also through the GC, the GoCardless process framework, because that one has all processes across GoCardless. So you can get to the same content in multiple ways. So once we created the overarching support structure, we had to decide which processes to map first. We revisited our business needs in order to do that, and started with some of the end-to-end processes within finance in our case, and other core processes, as well as those impacted by ongoing change initiatives. So a lot of these were either in operations or in payment processing. In terms of our progress to date, there were roughly around 360 processes across GoCardless based on the framework. And as of now, 98 of those are in iGraphics, which is over 27% in less than 8 months. So quite happy with that progress so far. In addition to creating the process maps for those high priority processes, we also wanted to make sure that we address all the use cases we identified while we were assessing our business need. So we grouped these into the 4 categories that you can see across the bottom, which are audit evidence, operational resilience, change impact assessment, and process improvement. Those are not mutually exclusive, but it helped us to group them into some sort of categories. I'll now show you some of the examples on how we've been addressing these different use cases. For most of them, it's not enough to understand how the processes and teams interact with each other, but we also needed to have that view just from a systems perspective. So we created our system architecture view within iGraphics, and it shows how all the internally developed systems and SaaS tools interact with each other. And as a tech company, this has been very important and very helpful. And the way it's set up is that you can click on any of the systems on this diagram, and it would take you to a centralized view of that system, and it would show you what process steps the system is used in, who's responsible for it, etc. But in addition to that system architecture view, for operational resilience, we started using the risk and control functionality a bit more as well. And we use that to start building out our business service catalog, which is needed for one of our ISO certifications, and it previously lived in a Confluence page, so that's what you can see on the left-hand side. And basically, critical systems and teams are shown here by their risk rating, as well as any relevant controls that are in place, and what level of business service disruption they would cause. We customize the risk parameters and risk matrix within iGraphics to provide the rating that aligns with our internal framework. And yeah, you can see there that iGraphics then, once you enter some risk data, calculates an inherent risk score. And then if there are any controls in place against that risk, then with a control effectiveness rating, it also calculates based on that, what's the residual risk score. Once this is fully set up in iGraphics, it should be more dynamically updated data rather than the static Confluence document that we've had previously. So when we think about the impact assessment side, we created specific reports to help prepare for planned change projects. So these can be searched for either a data table or a system that is going to be changed, showing the impacted processes and process owners. So the issue we had in the past on the data side was that not all downstream data dependencies are visible to our teams in our systems. And the data teams made changes sometimes that negatively impacted processes where the data was used. But now they have iGraphics as a source that they check, and then they can find out what's impacted and communicate to the relevant teams ahead of time, take away that friction. We also added iGraphics as a source to check as part of our software design process. So our product development teams would know to look in iGraphics for stakeholders, to find stakeholders to engage before they kick off their projects as well. Then also in addition to planned change, we're discussing using this view to manage incidents. So the incident managers can come here and find and notify stakeholders if there's an issue with our data pipeline or any of our systems. We also plan to start measuring which processes have the most incidents, and then we can help pinpoint any need for future improvement. So if we think about the different steps we want to take to meet our needs against each of the use cases, we've already talked about our progress in terms of documenting the processes and shown you some of the custom reports we built to address specific needs. Our next steps will include importing data into iGraphics from other systems. For example, our HR system, so we can see the names of process owners without manual effort of inputting the data. Also our procurement or vendor risk assessment platforms to import the external systems we have, or SaaS tools, and their risk ratings. And also our compliance system, so we can see regulatory and audit requirements and the associated controls. And then once we've brought those things into iGraphics, we can then link them to processes, systems, and teams, and just reduce the burden of manually having to enter a lot of data. So that's in progress right now already. We also want to focus on process improvement with a view specifically to increase efficiency. So as we scale, there's been an increasing emphasis on cost effectiveness. So we are reviewing a lot of our operational and risk processes, especially to see where we can improve. And to help with this, I developed a qualitative measure used to score processes in terms of their efficiency, creatively named Process Efficiency Index. And basically, iGraphics has been really useful there too, because seeing the process maps and visually how they look, it's been really useful to assess and score processes against that measure. So for example, we can see where there's a lot of swivel chairing, which is my new favorite phrase for when a team needs to use a lot of different systems and screens in order to perform a single task or a process, and a lot of handoffs between the teams as well is really visible on process maps. And on the process improvement side, we're also now starting to think about how and when we might want to do process mining. So watch this space. Hopefully, maybe in like a year's time, we'll have a good use case on how we use process mining as well. And then finally, we want to do some GoCardless wide communications as well to make everyone aware of iGraphics and the broad range of information that can be found there for all the use cases, or even ones that we haven't thought of ourselves. So far, we've been engaging more the senior leadership team and the teams impacted by ongoing initiatives, but we will do some broader communications in the near future as well. At the same time, we're thinking about the governance structure as well to introduce around process mapping, because we need to make sure the information in there is a trusted source of truth for basically any of our use cases to stand. So we don't create all the content centrally from our team. We are creating guidance on how to use iGraphics and basically guidance to ensure consistency across the different teams and users. And we've done some training sessions as well now to select groups of users who are already there creating content. Level 1 to 3 processes will also go through a central review. So my team will provide that quality assurance in order to be visible to all viewers. And then level 1 to 3 content also will go through a periodic review, currently set to quarterly, to ensure that changes are reflected and the information is up to date, which is essential for things like audit. We're just about to kick off the first round of this quarterly review process, so fingers crossed it will go smoothly. And yeah, if there are any changes required as part of that review, then it needs to be flagged to my team, and then we centrally either make the change ourselves or enable the relevant team to make the changes on their side. And that will assess priorities and capacity based on the amount of the volume of change, and then make decisions on where that responsibility should sit. And then that leads me on to talk a bit about how we think about access to iGraphics. We want ultimately everyone at GoCardless to have view access to establish it as that source of truth, and for people to use it for all of the information that we've been capturing there. Then we have a small central team. As I mentioned, we would be providing quality assurance oversight, and we would have some of the permanent licenses in terms of architect and designer access. But some of the teams across different teams would also have some permanent licenses if their role justifies it. So there are some process improvement teams specific to various different functions in the business. So it will probably make sense for some of them to hold permanent access. And also we'll have some rotating licenses that we would give on a temporary basis if certain teams need it for a few months because they have a project going on that needs new processes documented or a lot of changes to existing documentation. And yeah, so we would rotate that and give it as and when people need it across the teams. So we have achieved quite a lot in under 8 months, but our journey obviously has not been without challenges. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about those as well. A few of these have been around stakeholder management, specifically when thinking about engaging them around the process framework at the start of this journey. And I think one challenge was that people, when seeing phrases that were exactly the same as the name of a team or a function within GoCardless, to disassociate that from a team and org structure and think about it from a process hierarchy perspective. So it was challenging to explain in certain cases. And then secondly, when needing time commitment from various teams as well to map out processes or review and provide comments, and then basically approve it from their perspective, needed to explain the value, what this would bring in order to justify the time and effort on their side. And that's not always a straightforward case to make, depending on the team. In terms of process mapping, as we're building a lot of the content from scratch, we had to make some decisions on what level of detail to go into. In some cases, some of our stakeholders didn't necessarily agree with where we thought that we would stop, especially when the central team was putting in the effort to do the mapping. So they wanted to go deeper, and we had to manage their expectations up. And then also documenting a lot of processes while we have a lot of ongoing change, and just making a decision on do we want to document the current view now and then update it in a few months, or is it better to just hold off and then just document it once the new processes are up and running? And there are pros and cons against either of those approaches. And then we're still fairly early in the journey of understanding and optimizing process efficiency. So one challenge we've had was creating reports within iGraphics itself without exporting or extracting the data to help with this. I think we kind of found a hybrid approach, but that's something that we're still learning about. Then in terms of planning and governance, since we have a small central team, there's a lot of prioritization going on in order to get the most value out of limited resources. And again, just managing that ties together with stakeholder management. So basically negotiating with them on who's mapping out which processes. And then finally, as I mentioned, we just kicked off the regular review process to keep the documentation up to date. So no one's screamed about it just yet, but we've not asked them to actually start reviewing maps. That's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So I think both logistically and from a stakeholder management side, that will probably raise further challenges. And it's a big question mark how much ongoing effort that will bring for the relatively small central team. So we'll see how manageable that ends up being. So if we think about advice for anyone starting on this journey now, I grouped this under two of GoCardless's values, and I swear these are actually the company values. I didn't just make them up to come up with them to support this slide. So start with why, always come back and be guided by the business need. So that's been, I think, key throughout this for us. Starting with the most high impact processes, understanding and addressing the key use cases, and just keep coming back to those. And then another of our values is make it happen. So I think the way I'd summarize it is don't wait for complete buy-in across the whole company to get started, because it's much more powerful to have built enough so that the value can be demonstrated firsthand. So just starting small and then using that to demonstrate to a wider audience, really helpful. If that's done right, I think people will want to get involved and get the value out of it. We did have a specific example where a senior stakeholder was initially really reluctant because of the effort their team would need to invest to get things documented. And then a few months later, and a few months and a demonstration later, they were proactively asking how they could get involved and have their processes mapped. So that was a real win for the team and our approach.